Hi everyone, I'm Mike and this is the Sunday Art Show. Once again we're going to take a look at Sky's Portrait Artist of the Week. We're up to week 7, painting Clare Balding, and I'm going to try and show you a new technique again this week. So for today's painting I'm going to be using a 7B pencil, some watercolour and a Biro, and this is the normal order I would use them in. I'd use the pencil first, then the paints, washes of watercolour, and then the Biro to kind of add some detail. But I'm actually going to switch things up and reverse the order. So today I'm going to be starting with Biro, then I'm going to apply the watercolour with dry brush, and then unusually, for me at least, I'm going to use the graphite pencil on top of the watercolour and the Biro. So we'll see how that goes. So I've taken several screenshots as you saw at the start of the video, but I'm starting off with the one I just put up on screen. A4 pad of mixed media paper. And like all the preliminary sketches I do, I just try to stay really loose, let the nib of the pen kind of float across the paper as much as I can, or as much as I dare, I perhaps ought to say, when it comes to painting portraits, or drawing portraits in this case. So if you're painting or drawing an animal, or a still life or something, or a building or a hill, you know, generally you've got a little bit more leeway than you have when it comes to doing a portrait, because you know, with a portrait, to get the likeness, you've got to get everything pretty much spot on. And of course, there's still some room for artistic expression, but you've got to be pretty accurate. And that's been one of the great aspects of the Sky online show, Portrait Artist of the Week, is that, you know, it's really kind of got me back into my portrait painting. I've been exploring different techniques and kind of relearning some of the things that I knew from doing lots of portraits years ago, and also spotting new ways where I'm perhaps making mistakes in the same way, but you know, now I'm kind of learning to spot those mistakes a little earlier, hopefully. Anyway, back to the drawing in hand. So you can see I've put in some of Clare's hair, started to indicate the bridge of the nose, the right hand eye, both of the eyebrows are in place, and putting the other eye in. Now, generally speaking, you know, when I'm working away on these quick sketches, you know, I'm not really caring too much about trying to get the likeness exactly right. You know, that's kind of the point of the warm-up sketch. There's no pressure. You just work quickly and see what happens. And what I've done for some of the previous videos when I've done quick sketches is I've just done the quick sketches, and then I've gone on to a brand new painting, perhaps on a different scale, and started rather more carefully. So for example, if you look back to the videos of Rankin or of Will Young, that's kind of the technique I use there. But the other way to treat the warm-up sketches is just to do loads of them. Just do, you know, you could do like 20 or 30 and then just look at them and think, well, I like that one best. And then you could kind of paint on top of that. And that's a really nice way. It doesn't actually take that long, you know, especially if you kind of limit your time, you know, for each sketch. But it's a nice way to take the pressure off completely, allow for a little bit of looseness and expression, and see if you just happen to get a nice result. So we'll see if I can use that technique today. We'll see how it goes. So while I was chatting away there, started to indicate the nose, the mouth, the jawline. I'm putting in the neck as well. And Biro is a much underrated medium, as I have mentioned in a couple of earlier videos. It's, you know, you would think perhaps, you know, just if you're used to writing with a Biro, that, you know, you can get just one quality of line. But by angling the nib on the paper, you can get a really sort of scratchy and sketchy line. If you don't mind the blots that you sometimes get if you use the Biro too much continuously, they can add character to your line as well. But of course, if you don't want those, you can just use a paper towel to clean the nib periodically. And then you can build up regions of shading by using cross-hatching or just simply hatching. So it's surprisingly expressive for such a simple tool which was designed purely for writing. And you can see, for the most part, you can see how I'm holding the pen. I'm rarely holding it as if I was writing. I'm holding it, I am now, right at this second, for this little heart shape, bit of sort of extra precision there. But when I can, if you look back earlier in the video, I've been holding it much more like a brush. So I've been putting the non-nib end into the palm of my hand, or near the sort of crook between the the thumb and my forefinger, and trying to keep my fingers fairly straight and working from the wrist and the arm as much as I can. And that's a good way to kind of keep your body loose and relaxed and not tighten up too much. Now obviously working on A4 paper, it's only around about 8 inches by 11 inches, so it's not the largest, you know, scale drawing, so you have to be a little bit precise in places. And but you know, mixing between those two ways of holding the pen is a good way to get a different quality of line within your drawing. So I'm just going back to the hair where I started and just making some adjustments. So that's another good tip actually, is to just work your way, you know, across the face, left to right or from top to bottom. Then having completed things, go right back to what you did at first and think, well, in light of what I've just done, do I need to correct it further? So there's this first sketch complete. Here's the second pose I'm going to tackle. So I've speeded things up a little bit for you. You can see again I'm holding the pen in a non-writing hold, so very much a drawing or a painting hold for the most part. And again, it's just a nice way to stay loose. So just work really quickly. Don't want to think too much on these. This is the great thing about the screenshots though, is you can capture the sitter in kind of a quirky little mid-conversation pose. Eyes half closed, mouth open, you know, whatever it is, looking off to the side. And some of them come out better than others. So for example, this one here, not my favourite sketch of the day, but there's still a certain amount of character in the sketch. It still feels like a fleeting moment caught on paper. Here's the next one, another face-on sketch, but looking straight at us this time. And quite a reasonable likeness in this case, I think. So that this would be a candidate for perhaps, you know, adding some paint. But here's a lovely pose, Claire looking off to the side, you know, from the camera's point of view, as she was thinking about something. The light was catching her quite strongly. And if you're just starting out with portrait painting, then I think a 3/4 view and strong lighting from one side is a really good way to help you achieve a likeness, because it creates strong shapes on the face of dark and light. So, you know, it's a really good fun way to work. But anyway, on to the painting. So I decided to use the first sketch. So I've done those multiple sketches, I looked at them and I thought, well, the first one's pretty darn good likeness for a quick sketch. And now I'm coming in with my watercolor paint. Now on previous videos, I think almost exclusively on the channel, all the watercolor I've applied has been, for the most part, with washes of, you know, quite fluid washes of watercolor, and then maybe some detail using paint straight out of the tube. But here I'm using a dry brush technique. So I've got my palette off camera, and that's what I use to load the brush. But then having done that, you can see I'm working the brush across a blank bit of spare paper. And I'm doing that to get rid of nearly all the paint on the brush, just to leave a little bit, hence the term dry brush. And then I'm using that and then refreshing the brush further from that spare piece of paper. I'm using that dry brush technique to lightly caress the drawing I've done, and that's allowing me to put down some more textural marks than you would normally get with watercolor. And you can be really quite expressive. I would say it's closer to drawing, really, shading with drawing, than it is to traditional painting. But I love working with dry brush, it's really good fun. So the colours I'm using today, I showed them at the start of the video, but I didn't mention them. It's essentially the 3 primaries. So I'm using alizarin crimson, French ultramarine blue, cadmium yellow light, and I've got burnt umber in there as well, just in case I need to darken certain areas. But you can see I'm applying colour to key regions. I'm, you know, hitting the areas of deepest tone predominantly, so under the jaw, there's a bit to the right of the nose, under Claire's fringe there, but I'm also thinking about the direction of the surface, the curvature of the surface. So just like when I draw or paint with my interactive acrylics, I'm still applying the brush strokes in a direction which will help me create a sense of 3 dimensions. So for example, on her right hand cheek, the brush strokes are going kind of curved and down and downwards to kind of describe the shape of that cheek. And in general, I'm working from light to dark. That's the traditional way with watercolor, because it's a transparent medium, generally an easier way to work. And just starting to take a little bit more care now around the eyes, going a little bit slower. But I just wanted to show you another technique. So while that watercolor is fully drying, here's another of my sketches, and I've got a big chunky acrylic paint marker this time. And again, I've got a spare piece of paper to the left. And by not priming the nib too heavily, I can again run the marker across the spare piece of paper like I did just a moment ago, see what kind of mark I'll get, and then I can use the dry brush technique with a marker, with an acrylic paint marker, on my drawing. And so here I'm just using a neutral grey, keeping things monochrome, and again I'm picking out the tonal areas. And you know, I'm just waiting for my watercolour to dry here and having a bit of fun. But while I'm having fun in a relaxed way, I'm still learning about Clare's face. I'm learning about how the folds in her shirt fall. You know, you kind of learn the more drawing you do, even if you're not conscious of learning. So it's never time wasted, even if you only spend a couple of minutes on it, you know, and it's really good fun as well. And what I find is the more of these quick experiments I do, maybe I'll be working on a more elaborate painting, or I'll be working outdoors down at the coast or something, doing a seascape, and I'll think, oh, I could use that kind of mark I used for that portrait the other week. You know, and it all kind of feeds into what you do in the future. You don't always know where it will come to fruition, but it often does. It often does. So you can see quite a lot of texture you can get really quite quickly. If you look at her hair there, just a couple of sweeps of this dry brush marker pen, and you can get a nice textural effect. Also, when working with an implement with a nib as big as this, it really kind of trains you to use your brushes more efficiently as well, because to get small marks in the eyes here, I've got to be really careful about how I'm holding this big chunky marker pen, making sure I've got the angle just right compared to the paper so that I get a precise mark. And that's a similar skill, which is it's a transferable skill to when you use a big chunky brush in a painting. If you just want to get a little bit of detail, you want to think carefully, well, how can I hold the brush in such a way that I can get the fine line or mark that I need? Or perhaps you can think, well, if I've got paint loaded onto my brush, acrylic paint or oil paint, perhaps if there's a little, you know, the beginnings of a little drip hanging off the brush, perhaps I won't even touch the brush to the paper. Perhaps I'll just take the very end of that tiny little drip of paint and touch that to the paper. And that can give you a lovely precise mark as well. So it's all about being aware of how you're holding the brush or the marker pen or the biro, or you know, whatever it is you're into. That's going to make a huge difference to how expressive you can be and the type of marks that you can create. So there's that little monochrome sketch done. My watercolour should be dry now. So I'll go back to the main demo, and now I've switched to my graphite pencil. So as I said, this is a 7B or an 8B. It doesn't really matter too much for what I'm doing. But as far as I can remember, this is the first time I've used a graphite pencil on top of watercolour, on top of dry watercolour. So I'm interested to see what kind of effect I'll get. So what I'm doing here is looking at the painting that I've created so far, which is obviously line work with the biro. And although some tonal work has been done with the watercolour, for the most part it's really just an introduction of texture and colour. And so I'm looking at my reference and I'm thinking, okay, where do I really need to strengthen areas of tone? And so that's why I've darkened that right hand region of Clare's hair. And then in addition to that, I'm looking and thinking, well, where can I add lines without getting too fiddly, which are going to help my description of Clare? So I'm adding in just a few lines selectively because her hair is really quite sculpted and really styled quite carefully. So I want to depict that, hence the curved lines I've just put in at the front of her hair. And also some of the biro lines I've put down, you know, they won't be perfect, or perhaps they'll be somewhat incomplete. And I can use the pencil to complete things or correct things or enhance things as well. So for example, here you can see I'm actually adding a bit to the top of her head. Looking at my painting again, I realised, well, even though I went back and corrected at the end of the biro stage and I enlarged the head, I still hadn't made it quite large enough. So you can see just by adding that pencil line on top, it's brought the proportions of her face much closer to reality than it was before. Now, when it comes to pencils, I generally tend to avoid the H's, which are, I guess, sweeping statement used more for kind of technical drawing. They give you a very hard, fine line. I tend to go for the 4B, 5B and higher, or even, as I said, 7, 8, maybe even a 9B. I just like the strength of tone. I like the fact that I can smudge it. I like the fact that I can get a penknife and scrape the nib so I get lots of fine powder, and then put that on a paper towel or on the end of my finger, and then smudge that across the page as and when I want to create regions of smooth shading. So from my point of view, the high B numbers are more expressive for drawing than the H's. So just speeding things up a little bit here for you as well. And working around the face, working on the eyes in particular here. Being quite careful to be as efficient as I can be and make as few marks as possible, because if I can avoid it, I want to avoid trying to erase any of the pencil marks here, because even with a good quality putty rubber, there's a danger of lifting off some of the watercolour paint, which I definitely don't want to do, and B, even with a good quality putty eraser, it can be difficult to get a completely smudge free removal of a 9B or a 7B pencil. But you can see the eyes have just started to come to life a bit more now that I've added the pencil. Focusing on the bottom of the nose, that's the key region really, because it sticks out from the face the most. Obviously the shape of the bulb on the end of the nose and the nostrils is quite intricate, and generally a shadow will be cast on the face by that part of the nose as well. The mouth also, now I've caught Claire mid-conversation here with quite a kind of almost a concerned or perhaps pensive look in her eyes. And so the look in her eyes coupled with the shape of her mouth is going to kind of convey all of the emotion in this particular pose. But I was really quite pleased with using this pencil on top of the watercolour. I feel it works really nicely actually and gives quite a unique and expressive look, and it's quite a sensitive way to work, I feel, because you can just ever so gently enhance the watercolour. One of the things we sometimes struggle with watercolour paintings is getting a strength of contrast between our darkest tones and our lightest tones. And here I feel it's a nice balance. I'm getting some nice darks in there, but they're not so overwhelmingly dark that the unpainted paper looks out of place, or the light watercolour looks out of place. And I just used a paper towel a moment ago to smudge some of the marks I put down on Claire's shirt. Anya Devine, by the way, was the professional artist on this week's show, so definitely check out her website. I'll put her link in the description below this video. So here are some close-ups of the drawing. As you can see, I really feel I've quite sensitively caught a little bit of emotion in Claire's face there, so I'm really happy with this technique. Hope you enjoyed this little video. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe, and I hope to see you next Sunday for the next episode of the Sunday Art Show. Thanks very much for watching.